Looking closely at today's scripture, it seems to be about love of all kinds. This theme can be seen in today's communion antiphon from the 13th chapter of John. I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Matthew's Gospel today, part of the Sermon on the Mount, which we have been hearing recently, employs an antithesis, both neighbor and enemy to be loved. Peter Feldmeyer, in his book Living Christ, writes, Matthew's is a gospel of doing. God demands that our lives show concrete fruits of discipleship, evidenced in acts of compassion, love, forgiveness, and attention to those in need. But it is also a gospel of being. One's inner disposition overwhelmingly matters. Jesus demands interior transformation that reveals the deepest message of the kingdom. For years, today's gospel passage has puzzled me because of the statement about hating enemies. Well, I've come to understand a few things about that statement. While it appears that nowhere in the Old Testament is hatred of one's enemy commanded, there are instances in which hatred of evil is understood to be right. For example, the last verses of Psalm 139. This antithesis, as do the others in the Sermon on the Mount, reflect a posture of heart, an inner transformation that requires both God's grace and our own cultivation. Without both God's grace and our own cultivation, how can we approach being perfect as Jesus commands us in today's gospel? In considering Paul's letter in 2 Corinthians, it appears that Paul had organized a collection for the relief of the Christian community in Jerusalem. As an example to the Corinthians, Paul cites the Macedonians, who are giving beyond their means, spontaneously, telling the Corinthians to do the same, to test the genuineness of your love by your concern for others. Reading further in the letter, one can see that for Paul, such generosity shows the unity of church based on a shared, grace-filled love of God. An invitation, then, might be to recognize love in its various manifestations, our own and others, in our daily lives, seeing ourselves as part of one family of God. Sometimes we ask ourselves what we can do in this climate of disagreement and polarization, how we can solve any of the big problems surrounding us, we little people. It seems to me that what we can do lies in the small actions and choices of each day, grounded in our own and God's love, whether we recognize that love as source at the time or not, hoping and trusting that these will, through ripple effect, touch the lives of many. An example of a small choice. I was standing on the sidelines of a local soccer game a few weeks ago, final charged game of the season, and observed that one team was seated with players from a more experienced team, and of course, subsequently won. So I wondered why the other coach hadn't done the same. His response, it wasn't honest, and what are we teaching the boys? Looking back, that seems to me to be love at some cost, with a gain for his boys in seeing honesty and fairness, no matter how tempting to do the opposite. And perhaps, one hopes, they will remember this. Another story. Recently, I passed a woman in distress who had just come out of the church to find that her car wouldn't start. And then help given by a man driving down the street who stopped, parked his car in the street, and jump-started hers. Small daily choices, big effects on our road to Jesus' call to perfection. An invitation for us, then, might be to recognize the small acts of care and love, ours and others, in our day, and identify the grace and the love underlying each. We might consider in this regard the reflection attributed to the late Pedro Arrupe, S.J., Superior General of the Jesuits. Nothing is more practical than finding God. That is, than falling in love in a quite absolute, final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekend, what you read, who you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything.